Hey everyone, it's Rebecca from Thriving School Psychologist and Notes from the School Psychologist blog. I'm so excited today. I'm total fangirling out right now because I have Dr. Kristin Neff with me. And she is a person who is at the forefront of research on self-compassion. And I saw her in Berkeley, and it was a game changer, not only for how I work as a helping professional, but how I work with my students. So Kristin, welcome. I'm so happy to have you.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. Happy to be here.
So can you just cue us up with, what is self-compassion? And, we kind of, some of the terms get interchanged like self-care, self-compassion. Can you tell us a little bit about the definition of self-compassion in your work?
Yeah. So, according to my model anyway, self-compassion is just a way of relating to yourself emotionally when you're feeling under stress, when you're experiencing some difficulty in your life, or when you feel inadequate, maybe you failed at something or made some big mistake and you're feeling bad about yourself. Self-compassion just basically refers to treating yourself with the same kindness, care, understanding that you would more typically show to a good friend you cared about. But actually, if you start comparing how we treat our good friends when they're struggling and how we treat ourselves, it's radically different. So basically, self-compassion, it's pretty simple. It just means relating to yourself with that same sort of, patience, understanding, kindness, and support that we normally show those we care about.
Right. That's so helpful. I mean, I work with school psychologists, and I am a school psychologist, and I feel like I don't know, sort of how doctors make the worst patients.
Yeah.
We dispense advice about self-compassion and self-care all day long to our students, the families, the teachers we work with. Why is it so hard for us to do that for ourselves?
Yeah, well, there's actually a lot of reasons. I mean, some are actually physiological. What happens when we're really stressed or when we've made a mistake, we're feeling bad about ourselves, is we actually feel threatened. And when we're in a threat state, our natural response is fight or flight. And so, basically we might think of what we normally do, beating ourselves up, as a fight response. We're trying to control ourselves. We're trying to get ourselves in line, trying to make sure it never happens again because we're frightened. So, it's understandable why we tend to be hard on ourselves and why it's easier to give compassion to others because, let's face it, you aren't really threatened if your student fails something, but when you fail, it's a big threat. And so that's kind of why it's more difficult to give it to ourselves. On the other hand, once we really give ourselves permission to be self-compassionate, it's not rocket science, mainly because we've developed the skills of being, kind and compassionate to others in all our relationships. But the thing about permission is really huge. So, and actually, our culture, but most of the cultures I've talked to, and I've gone all over the world talking about self-compassion, there's a lot of cultural blocks to self-compassion. We don't think it's a good thing. For instance, we're afraid it's the same as self-pity, right? So it's a good question. What's the difference between self-compassion and self-pity? Self-pity is woe is me. It kind of exaggerates how bad things are. It's very self-focused. But compassion, if you actually look at the root of the Latin compassion, it means to suffer with. There's a sense of connectedness in compassion. Everyone struggles, everyone's imperfect. That's the way life is. So when we have self-compassion, it's not saying, poor me, it's just saying, well, me too. In other words, I need to include myself in the circle of compassion because I'm a struggling human being like everyone else. People are also afraid, there's a lot of fears of self-compassion. They think it's going to make them self-indulgent, right? I'm just going to sit around eating chocolate all day. Well, you aren't really caring for yourself if you sit around eating chocolate all day, right? People are afraid it's going to undermine their motivation. There's actually a lot of research on this one. It shows it's just the opposite. Just like with a child, if you unconditionally love your child, support your child, encourage your child, they're more likely to succeed and be motivated than if you imagine if you treated your child like you treat ourselves, like, you're such a lazy fool, I hate you, you're good for nothing. I mean, it makes you cringe, but it's not motivating. Amazing. This is how people try to motivate themselves, and it's totally counterproductive. And so, but these are all things that get in the way of being more self-compassionate. And once we realize not only is self-compassion not going to harm me, but it's actually not self-focused at all. That when I include myself in the circle of compassion, when I remember I'm an imperfect being, we all struggle, it actually allows us to feel more connected to other people. And it also enhances relationships, allows us to be more giving to others. So, and this is really especially true for caregivers. You know, I don't know if you want to launch into that yet, but
I'd love to.
I'm a mother of an autistic child, you know, so I'm a special needs parent. And I can't even tell you how essential it was for me to practice self-compassion as I parented my son. You know, again, and it can feel really strange for people who are caregivers, either professionally, like a school psychologist, or, you know, in your personal life. It feels like, well, if I'm working with someone who's in pain or struggling, who am I to be kind to myself or give myself compassion? Shouldn't all my focus be on the other person? And so again, we kind of don't give ourselves permission to focus on ourselves. But what happens then when we do that is we get burnt out, right? If we're just giving and giving and giving, and we're feeling the pain of the person we're caring for. By the way, the human brain is designed to feel what other people are feeling. It's called empathetic resonance. So when, you know, you're working with students who are struggling, or your autistic kid who's having a tantrum, your brain is actually registering the pain of the person you're working with. So when we're professional caregivers, especially, constantly we're resonating with the pain and stress of others, which means we're feeling it, which means it's especially necessary to give ourselves compassion for the fact that it's hard to be a caregiver, right? And when we do that, what happens is puts us in a calmer state of mind. It helps us cope. We're more resilient. Ton of research showing that people in difficult situations, including caregivers, they're much more resilient when they have self-compassion. They're much more able to cope with the tough moments in their life. And when you give yourself compassion, what it does is it puts you in a better state of mind. And this is good for the person you care for in two ways. One, you know, you've got more resources to do your job and not be so burnt out when you're recharging your own battery. But it's actually that there's a kind of a hidden reason why I think self-compassion is especially good for caregivers. And that's because empathetic resonance goes both ways, right? Our brains are actually designed to pick up, to feel what other people are feeling. So maybe you're trying to be really kind to your students and giving and loving and supportive, but inside you're like burnt out and full of shame and self-loathing. What do you think your students are picking up on, or your child is picking up on, right? You know, people can, regardless of what you say on the surface, people can feel what you're feeling, because that's, you know, our mirror neurons, that's the way our brains work. So when you actually give yourself compassion and kindness and support and comfort for the fact that, hey, you know, it's really hard to be doing this. It's difficult for me too. It's difficult for me to listen to you or to be working this hard. Then when your mind gets more filled with compassion, everyone you come in contact with actually comes in contact with compassionate presence, as opposed to, you know, critical, shameful presence. And it actually helps them kind of do this surreptitious pathway as well.
That's amazing.
It's just so important for caregivers, but for everyone, to try to be friendly to themselves. You know, it's like what's the state of your own mind? Is the state of your own mind full of friendliness, unconditional acceptance, or is the state of your own mind one of shame and criticism? And, you know, that kind of says it all, really.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think that, you know, school psychologists in particular do give and give and give, and then feel guilt when they want to, you know, take care of themselves. It does feel self-indulgent, and I feel like school psychologists can get in a mental trap of, well, I have to care for this person. I have to, you know, work this weekend to make sure this happens for the student, and I have to worry about this person. And so you can get really caught up. So how do you get out of that trap? Is it a mental exercise of like thought stopping in the CBT world, or is it more of a mindfulness kind of, I accept this? Like, is there a mental exercise that one can do during the day when you're feeling stressed out and you just are giving yourself that permission?
Yes. So the way I define self-compassion, mindfulness is built into it. We need to be able to hold our pain in mindful awareness. In other words, we aren't lost in it. We're kind of aware of what's happening as it's happening. We kind of give ourselves kindness as a response to our pain. And then we just remember that this is, connects us to other people. Everyone goes through pain like this. And the thing about self-compassion, which is actually different than self-care, I mean, self-care is really hugely important. It's important to have work-life balance and all of that. But self-care is something you do off the job, right? Like if you're stressed out at work and you've got all these people coming to you, you can't say, I'm going to go get a massage. I need some self-care. I mean, sometimes you just have to work the hours. So self-compassion is something you can do on the job, in the moment, which basically says, you say to yourself internally, wow, I'm feeling so stressed. I'm feeling so overwhelmed. You notice I put my hand on my heart? It's actually one of the powerful ways to convey a sense of support and kindness to yourself, because as mammals, we're actually biologically programmed to respond to touch as a signal of care. So, when you take the moment to just, touch yourself and just really acknowledge, oh, this is really hard and I need to support myself in this moment. You can do that while you're busy at work, and it actually gives you more ability to cope with the stress of work. And then it also gives you more mental space. So you're not so locked up in, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. It gives you more mental space to say, okay, well, actually, I got to set my priorities here, and maybe I do need to adjust the time I'm spending at work versus self-care. So, self-compassion leads to more self-care, but it is a little different because self-care is off the job. Self-compassion is in the moment, on the job, when the stress and difficulty is actually happening. That's why it's one of the reasons it's so powerful. It's really a way of holding yourself in the midst of difficulty. It's not anything you do. It's a way you relate to yourself and your own stress and struggle and feelings of failure or inadequacy, you name it. Whatever pain is coming up, self-compassion can hold it.
Yeah, one of the things you said when I was watching you speak in Berkeley that was like, and actually I remember the physical movement you made is like self-compassion as you're aware, I'm stressed, I'm burnout, or this heartbreaking situation with this student that's really awful, I'm really feeling it. And it takes a huge amount of courage to, and I think you moved your body, turn towards that suffering instead of away. And for me, sometimes self-care can seem like turning away. Like, I'm just going to go take a bubble bath and hope it goes away, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what, again, self-care, it is important. Absolutely.
I love it. I love
balance. But in a way, because it's doing something other than focusing directly on the pain you're experiencing, it can be used for avoidance. Not always at all, but it can be. What's really important is there's kind of 3 elements of self-compassion, which kind of, you might say, are almost sequential steps. The first thing is you need to turn towards your pain, and you need to name it, and you need to say, this is just really hard for me right now. I'm really struggling, just like if you have a friend who comes to you with a problem and you don't even validate her issues and you just go straight into fix-it mode, you're not really giving your friend compassion. Usually your friend is coming to you because they just want to be heard. They just want you to say, yeah, God, I'm so sorry. That must be so hard for you right now. We need to actually do the same for ourselves. We need to acknowledge what's happening. We need to validate it. And then we need to respond with kindness, warmth, tenderness, concern, and also, the desire to help in any way we can. And also this element of common humanity is so important because, we're funny when we're having a struggle, or especially if we fail or we make a mistake, there's the sense that, this shouldn't be happening. Something has gone wrong. I wasn't supposed to have made that mistake, or things aren't supposed to be this difficult. Then if you think about it, well, we're human beings, and the plan we signed up for was that life will be difficult, and then we'll get old, and then we'll die. We'll also have lots of beauty and wonderful things along the way, but that's what it means to be human. We make mistakes. We're imperfect. Our life's imperfect. We struggle, and we've got good things and bad things, highs and lows. This is the whole human mess that we're part of, a beautiful mess, but it's very messy. Being a human is not about perfection, that's for sure. And yet we kind of act as if something has gone totally wrong if things aren't perfect. And the problem with that, when we have that reaction, this idea that something has gone wrong, is it makes us feel very isolated. as if in that moment, everyone else on the entire planet is living this perfectly normal, unproblematic life. And it's just me who's overworked, or it's just me who's so stressed out, or it's just me who feels like such a failure. And then you're really adding insult to injury, because not only are you suffering, you feel all alone in your suffering, you know? Mm-hmm. So with self-compassion, we just remember that, you know, yeah, this is hard. And, you know, but this is kind of part of life. All human beings have it harder. It's not just me. This is really connects me to every other person. And therefore, can I just respond with some kindness and tenderness and some warmth? It's like sometimes the analogy we use is like a parent with a sick child. The parent doesn't comfort the sick child to make the sickness go away. The sickness is just, you know, you have a sickness, you have the flu, it comes and it goes. But to comfort and soothe and be there with the child as they experience the sickness just makes it so much easier to bear. And that's kind of what we're doing with self-compassion. We're just making the pain of life is easier to bear. And what can happen when you do that is, ironically, you start being a lot happier. You start being more motivated. You start being able to cope with a lot more. Because again, we thrive on this sort of unconditional love and acceptance that we desperately want from other people. We can actually learn to give it to ourselves.
I think that's school psychologists are particularly well suited to applying what they naturally give to students to themselves. It's almost just like this, like, for me, it was like a key that unlocked for me. I'm like, I can do this for myself. Like, this was like groundbreaking stuff for me when I saw you speak. And I feel like, you know, if we can model for our students how to be self-compassionate, we can, like you said, you know, teach them to be self-compassionate. And, you know, I think one of the things that actually resonates in that translation from I'm the caregiver and I'm going to teach a student how to be self-compassionate is there is this byproduct where it's like a secondary benefit. Like you're teaching it, but then you're reinforcing it for yourself. And
so you're modeling it. That's the best way to teach self-compassion, is to model it, you know.
Yeah, students, teenagers especially, really resonate with what I think I said, be your own bestie.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, right. You know, when they're critical about like, well, I failed this test because I got a B-, or, you know, something has gone wrong and they need self-compassion. And so, well, what would you say to your friend who got a B-? And you know, it's always something really loving and like, oh, try your best or ask the teacher for help. And when, well, what do you do to yourself? Like, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you get that? You should have studied harder. Like, and you can catch yourself. And since I started teaching that to students, I catch myself in the craziest ways, like beating myself up. Like I hit my head and I'm like, God dang it, Dunny, what are you doing? I'm like, wait, why? I would never tell someone who hit their head. Like,
or what did you do, or whatever, the things we tell ourselves. Absolutely. But it just takes little consciousness. And again, we don't want to judge ourselves for not being self-compassionate, because I think what happens is when we feel threatened, our first automatic response is, you know, fight or flight. It's our sympathetic nervous response. It happens really quickly and it's almost unconscious. And we're scared. And, you know, we just think, oh my God, what can I do to fix this? This is a problem. And so we think that fighting the problem, which is actually ironically fighting ourselves, is going to help. It doesn't, but, you know, it comes from this place of just wanting to be safe. But ironically, the better, more effective way to feel safe is to give yourself unconditional support and kindness. It's going to be more likely to keep you safe than cutting yourself down. You know? Right.
So school psychologists need to have that mindfulness of like, I'm feeling the suffering, turn towards the suffering, acknowledge it, and then activate the same care they would give a fellow school psychologist. They wouldn't say, oh, you really botched up that meeting. I mean, or whatever it is that happened.
Yeah. And, you know, it doesn't mean you don't give yourself constructive criticism. It's not like you say, oh, everything's fine. Like, unconditional acceptance doesn't mean you don't notice problems or things you need to change. You know, Carl Rogers said, the curious paradox is the more I accept myself, the more I can change. It's kind of giving yourself this bottom line of, you know, it's okay to be a human being. I'll accept myself anyway. But how can I help myself be my best self? Because I want to be happy, not because I'm insufficient as I am. And that type of encouragement, again, just like a parent might give to a child, is going to be much more effective than kind of conditional, well, I'll only love you if you get straight A's or if you do perfectly. So you know, it's interesting. It's pretty... in a way, it's very straightforward. It kind of makes sense. And that's what, but it's interesting that people don't think it makes sense because our culture doesn't support it. But now there's so much research on self-compassion. People are kind of they're not being able to deny it anymore. People are realizing, okay, I see, but the research shows it's a healthier way to relate to yourself. You're going to be physically healthier, you're going to be happier, you're going to be less depressed. You're actually going to be more effective with your own care and support than with your own constant self-criticism. So.
Right. And then, if you're in a better headspace and mental space, then you're going to be a better provider as a school psychologist.
Exactly. Yeah. People, for instance, if you're looking for a partner, maybe some of the people watching this are like dating online, have them get their self-compassion score first. You can get it on my website. Just Google self-compassion and you'll find me, because self-compassionate people make much better relationship partners. Their partners describe them as being more caring, more loving, more intimate, more accepting, less likely to be aggressive or controlling. Again, the more we give to ourselves, the more we're able to give to others. So it's not selfish at all, even though we're afraid it is.
This is fascinating. I'm so glad. I know you have a very busy schedule, talking all over the world, and I'm really honored that you talked to my school psychologist group. Where
Yes.
can we go to learn more information? Is there any resources that you want to direct them to?
Yes, absolutely. So again, the easiest place, just Google self-compassion. You'll find my website, selfcompassion.org. I've got videos, I have a TED Talk, I have exercises, I have guided meditations if you're into that, or other practices. But also we just came out right now with a workbook, which is basically in workbook format, the 8-week self-compassion training program that I've developed with my partner, Chris Germer. And that you can actually self-guide yourself through our self-compassion training course without having to go to a course. And that's available on Amazon. It's called the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. So there's a lot more resources now than there used to be. But probably the easiest thing to do is Google self-compassion. You'll find me and start from there. And then you can also maybe even take a course or a workshop in your area if you want. So.
Fantastic. I really appreciate your time. Keep doing the great work you're doing, and we really appreciate you joining us. And
well, I appreciate all the hard work school psychologists do, so thank you.
Thanks, Kristin.
All right.